Theresa May flies to China tomorrow on a trade mission seeking to secure the sort of deal the government's hoping to land after Brexit. It's possible she might never have been as happy to leave these green and pleasant lands after yet another weekend of torrid headlines and a growing chorus of criticism from across her party, not least from a band of Brexiteers who seem to feel distrustful of the Prime Minister's ability to deliver. Today, Europe's foreign ministers made a point of showing their unity on the issue by taking just 2 minutes to agree the hard-line terms on which negotiator Michel Barnier can approach the next round of Brexit talks.
The EU position is very clear. The transition will last for 21 months until the 31st of December 2020. During this limited period of time, the whole EU acquis will continue to apply to the UK.
Michel Barnier, so how does the state of Brexit talks affect Theresa May's leadership, despite the growing noise? Is there any sense anything's actually changed? Nick Watt is here. A little bit more movement tonight, Nick. What's your sense?
Well, a very interesting interview by Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, in The Sun tomorrow. And he's essentially saying to Brexiteers, guys, you're going to have to learn to live with disappointment because we, the Conservatives, do not command a majority in the House of Commons. But he says, look, the core Brexit is going to be delivered out of the single market, out of the customs union. But also in The Sun, there are 3 Remainers, Nick Soames, Robert Halfon and Nick Bowles, who are saying that the Prime Minister really needs to be setting out a vision, a domestic vision for Britain after Brexit. So look, what is going on? I think what is happening at the moment is that 2 forces are colliding. There's the legacy of that recent reshuffle, lots of resentful ex-ministers, and then you have Brexiteers who are thinking, is this Prime Minister just going a little too far in a soft Brexit direction?
But she's going to survive this, Nick.
Well, I'm reminded of what Harold Wilson said in 1969. You ask what's going on, I'm going on, this government is going on. For the moment, Theresa May is going on. And interestingly, I was talking to one former member of the government who says, the quiet ones are still quiet. The noisy ones are noisy. Ian Duncan Smith was in trouble when the quiet ones stopped being quiet. But on the other hand, I have been talking to other Tories. I spoke to one former minister who said they believe that there will be a challenge, there should be a challenge against Theresa May in the summer to give a new leader a long time to bed in for the 2022 election. This person said to me, Theresa May, it really isn't working. And they say, you journalists, you've got the wrong end of the stick. You're looking for these 48 letters that you need to get that confidence vote. We're not after the 48. They're after the 159 votes you need to get to oust Theresa May in a confidence motion that would follow that.
Nick, before we go, quick word on Labour.
Yes, there's going to be an interesting new face on the Labour front bench when the EU withdrawal bill starts its long journey through the House of Lords. That is Lord Peter Goldsmith. Now, his evolving advice on the Iraq War as Tony Blair's Attorney General famously meant that that war, that military action, was authorised for those UK forces. Now, what's interesting about this is that the defining moment of Jeremy Corbyn's career was opposing the Iraq War. You could say maybe that's how he managed to bury New Labour in the 2015 leadership contest for the Labour Party. But he, of course, doesn't appoint the front bench in the House of Lords. That's Baroness Smith of Basildon, who's the Labour leader in the Lords. But I'm told that this is more of a guest on the front bench, not an actual front bencher. So Jeremy Corbyn is living with it.
Nick, thanks very much. Well, with us from Westminster, Nicky Morgan, former Education Secretary under David Cameron, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who now leads the European Research Group of Tory Eurosceptics. Now, 2 backbenchers, I guess. If there are grumblings or any sense of unease coming from both of you, then Theresa May's probably bang on, isn't she, doing something absolutely right? Nicky, let me start with you. Nick said, forget about the letters to Graham Brady. I mean, are you even hearing of anyone actually voicing their unhappiness in letter form at the moment, or is that complete tittle-tattle?
No, I'm not hearing of anybody. Nobody is going around saying we signed this or we sent this in, and I certainly haven't done that. And I think it's really important. I think what we're seeing now, the EU today talking about the negotiating stance. We've got a critical 9 months ahead of us, and I think everybody in the Conservative Party realises that we will be judged by the success or otherwise of these Brexit negotiations, the final deal that we get to. The Conservative Party has a strong reputation for economic competence. We must not jeopardise that in these Brexit negotiations. And all these noise off about the leadership really don't help.
Where do you think the instability is coming from then? I mean, when you hear Johnny Mercer, not a particularly natural rebel, saying the window's closing for the PM to meet the challenges, is he right to speak out? Is that an unhelpful intervention, or...?
Well, look, I think there are frustrations, inevitably, and I think that we're just hearing, I think some of my other colleagues are talking about a need for a real focus on domestic legislation. I think that we've seen with a focus on the environment, for example, recently, that it is possible to talk about things other than Brexit. I mean, you've just had a piece talking about PIP and about mental health. The Prime Minister is a passionate champion of better mental health care for everybody. We'd all like to be talking much more about that than we are about Europe. And of course,
well,
Brexit's
she got
important.
that one quite badly wrong, to be honest, didn't she?
Well, we've just been debating that, and obviously you've been discussing it and everything else. Actually, a very fast reaction from the government saying we're not going to appeal this. You know, this hasn't been handled right in the past. We're going to get it right now. But broadly, supporting people, for example, with mental health challenges, looking at the way the NHS is working, rising educational standards in our schools. We'd all like to be talking about those things. But Brexit's going to be central for the next 9 months. The point is that we can't all fall out with each other. That is not what the country needs.
So the way you're talking, Nicky, sorry for coming in, but the way you're talking, you are happy to see her fulfil her parliament for 5 years. You're happy then to believe that she has a game plan. She actually has a series of things that she is not just talking about, but doing. You believe that?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister, when she took over the Premiership and stood on the steps of Downing Street, laid out a very, a plan, a speech that we all thought was brilliant.
Is she doing, though?
There is action, but the honest truth is that trying to get much attention on anything other than Europe at the moment is really difficult. I think certainly the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, we know that things like the budget, things like productivity, things like what's happening in terms of growing our economy are incredibly important. But all of that, of course, the Brexit negotiations are going to be very influential in all of that. But it's really important that it's not just about the Prime Minister. There's a whole cabinet there, and if the PM is not the person who's going to be setting out a plan, then, as I've argued today, the Cabinet have got to do in their own areas and within the bounds of collective responsibility. They've got to agree an end state for Brexit. They've got to stick to those lines. Because actually everyone falling out with each other is really, it's not helpful, it's not the right thing for the country at this particular moment in our history.
Let me just turn to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Do you trust the PM has your best interests at heart, your party, your Brexit?
Oh, yes, of course I do. I completely trust the Prime Minister, and I actually agree with a lot of what Mrs Morgan was saying in relation to the need for unity and for the government to set out what its end state is going to be. That there may be bits of the end state that I don't like, there may be bits of the end state that Mrs Morgan doesn't like, but what we need to know is where they aim to get, and then we can have a proper discussion, rather than having the Chancellor saying one thing and the collective Cabinet view being another.
What is your group then in the Times splash tomorrow saying they give her a 50-50 chance? I mean, it doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, does it?
Well, that's nothing to do with me. I haven't said that.
But you understand where they're coming from, or do you think you have dissent within your own
No, there are always people with different views in a party.
No, but this isn't within the party. This is actually within the group that you head, isn't it?
But the ERG doesn't have a single view. The one thing we are collectively supportive of is the Lancaster House speech and the manifesto, and we want to back the Prime Minister in implementing that. Whether individual members speculate on the party leadership or not is nothing to do with me.
Is your support for her qualified when you talk about on the basis of Lancaster House, on the basis of what she said? I mean, were you happy with what Michel Barnier had to say to the Prime Minister today? Will you continue to support her if she lets that transition deal go ahead?
The terms laid down today in the transition deal are very bullying from the European Union. They are very harsh terms. They would require us to continue to allow free movement of people, even when we'd left.
What most people expected, isn't it? That was what most people expected under Lancaster House.
We would take, for the first time since 1066, laws imposed on us by a foreign power without having any say over it ourselves. Now, that may be acceptable if we have a clear idea of what the end point is.
So you would put up for that for 2 years if you knew what was coming afterwards?
If we had any idea what's coming afterwards. But we hear talk that we might stay in a customs union rather than the customs union and not get the advantages of Brexit, that we may have a high degree of regulatory alignment, which means remaining an EU rule taker and not getting the benefit of removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers on food, clothing and footwear 21% of the average household's economy that would have the opportunity to make everybody in this country better off.
So
it's a
frankly,
really
Jacob,
exciting opportunity if we grasp
qualified,
it.
though. Your support will remain qualified.
My support for the Prime Minister on a personal level as Prime Minister is absolute. It's unqualified. Of course, there are aspects of policy where I want to see the Prime Minister implement what she has already said. And as the Prime Minister is a very forthright and clear person, I expect she will implement the policy she's set out. Let
me just ask you about this story that's breaking in BuzzFeed announced. They have seen the impact of Brexit from the government's own analysis, EUX's analysis, cross-Whitehall briefing, they say, and under the government's own assessment, a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, UK growth would be 5% lower over the next 15 years. If there was a no-deal scenario and it was WTO rules, it would reduce by 8%. They say from what they have seen, the UK would be worse off outside the European Union under every scenario modelled in every part of the UK. Your response to that?
The key phrase is every scenario modelled, and it depends on the basis of the model. If they use the same type of gravity models that the Treasury used prior to Brexit, those were comprehensively wrong. It predicted an increase in unemployment just by voting to leave of 500 to 800,000.
So the government's own model might be completely wrong
on the basis of these gravity models. And the key there is the assumption of the tariffs you apply to goods coming into the EU. And I don't know about these models, but the ones done before the Brexit vote assumed we would apply the common external tariff to EU trade with the UK. And that sort of thing makes these models highly speculative and so far very inaccurate.
A quick word from you, Nicky Morgan, on that Brexit study. And do you think the Prime Minister will be there to see us through Brexit?
Yes, I think, as I say, it's too important to worry about leadership contests at this time. We've got to focus, because actually what those models do, and we can argue about the underlying basis and everything else, but what they show is there is a risk, and this is why I wanted to remain, of Brexit on our economy. And at the end of the day, our constituents are not going to thank us, nor is the country, if we have weakened their economic security and their jobs and livelihoods as a result of our negotiations. That shows why this is so critical to make sure that we do not undermine our economy any more than we're already going to by actually leaving in the first place.
Thank you both very much. Thanks.
Thank you.